What are you doing up there? Oh, don't worry about it. Anyway, today is an exciting day. It's day 10 of the Cheese a Day Challenge, and I'm joined by an organic dairy farmer who has not only produced a fantastic, we hope, cheese, but also has made massive contributions to the world of British farming and sustainable farming in particular. So let's not wait around. Let's just welcome Patrick Holden. Patrick, thank you so much for, this is your cheese, isn't it? So it's so great to be tasting it with you. Just introduce yourself, Patrick. It'd be great to hear a bit about you.
Okay, I am Patrick Holden, and this is my wife, Becky. We farm here on a hill in West Wales, about 300 acres, and we're organic and regenerative, and we can discuss what all that means. But we've got a herd of Ayrshire cows, 80 approximately, the milk from which we turn into a raw milk single farm cheese called Havod. And I've been here for about 47 and a half years. So it's very interesting to have had a relationship with a piece of land for such a long time, because you see things that you wouldn't see if you were just here for a short time. So that's our story. That's the highlights of our story. I'm a Londoner, and I got back to the land as a hippie in the 70s.
Well, I really appreciate you terming it a relationship with the land. And one of the things I noted is that you decided not to grow your herd because you thought that you were at the kind of maximum carrying capacity for your land without bringing in loads of external inputs. So clearly sustainability and working in tandem with nature is really important to you. How does that play out on your farm?
Yes, I mean, I believe in the principle of the circular economy, and I think that farmers are managing ecosystems and stewarding the land and nature. And in our case, I think most farmers would like to produce as much food as is consistent with looking after the land that we steward. And I think what's gone wrong with farming is we've got into a sort of race for maximum productivity using a lot of chemicals, and that has created a massive imbalance. It's destroyed a lot of the biodiversity which used to coexist with food production. It's affecting climate change big time. And farmers don't even enjoy farming anymore because farmers have become factories. And I think farmers are on a treadmill trying to produce food often at less than the cost of production. It's just all gone wrong, and we need to change it. And we can change it because more and more people feel this way now. So I feel incredibly optimistic about the future, but there's a lot to do if we are to get to where we need to be in about 10 or 15 years to avoid irreversible climate change. And I've got a day job, as you know, running the Sustainable Food Trust. But actually, it's really important for me to be farming here because all the things that I'm advocating are sort of insights that I've derived from practice.
Yes, you're as well as talking the talk, you're walking the walk. And it's very clear from browsing your website and researching you that's something that you absolutely do. So the introduction of cheese, now that didn't happen 47 years ago when you arrived. Tell us the story of Havod.
In 2005, the Specialist Cheesemakers Association hosted their AGM at Gorwith, which was Todd Trethowan's, it was where he used to be before he moved back to, telephone. It was where he used to be before he moved back to Somerset. And they hosted the AGM of the Specialist Cheesemakers Association that year. And Randolph Hodgson, who was the chair and the founder of the SCA, he phoned me up and he said, do you think I could bring all the cheesemakers? This is the day after the big event. And in fact, Prince Charles was there and he presented the prizes. And he said, I want to bring all my cheesemakers over to your farm. He said, I know you want to make cheese, but you're not. But you're farming organically and you've got Ayrshire cows. And I want to influence the cheese-making fraternity, many of whom have got, Holstein Friesian cows that are using lots of nitrogen, that there's a different way to farm. And that way of farming could be good for cheese-making. So I said, sure, bring them along. And they came, and it was a really beautiful sort of sweltering hot July afternoon. And all these blessed cheesemakers came, all the great and the good of the cheesemaking world. And my son, Sam, and his fiance were on the farm. And we had tea on the lawn, and they kind of joined in. And then I took them on a farm walk. And then afterwards, I was chatting to Sam, and I said, I suppose you wouldn't fancy making cheese, would you? And to my great surprise, he was 30 years old then. He said yes. So Sam and Rachel, now his wife, developed the cheese making project, and they drew inspiration from my great friend, long departed friend now, Dougal Campbell, who used to farm around here and made a cheese called Tin Grieg. And the Havod recipe is loosely based on the Tin Grieg recipe, with a lot of help from people like Simon Jones of Lincolnshire Poacher and all sorts of other wonderful cheesemakers who just sort of opened their doors and their cheese room so that Sam and Rachel could learn.
Well, the cheese world seems to be this amazing kind of collaborative, cooperative network. We tasted the Galway Caerphilly from the Trethowans on the 5th of February, and we went to Tim Jones, the Lincolnshire Poacher, on Monday. So it's great to have some of the characters in your backstory as well as part of that.
Well, it's rather a nice story because the Trethowans learnt from Dougal Campbell. Simon Jones made his very first Lincolnshire Poacher cheese with Dougal Campbell, and Dougal Campbell inspired and was an influential in the development of Havod. So really the lineage of it is completely fascinating and rather lovely, because it's a human story and it's the passing on of knowledge in an open way.
So he was clearly an inspiration to many. And as Patrick, are you? I mean, we mentioned that you talk the talk and walk the walk. You founded the Sustainable Food Trust 10 years ago now, I think 10 years ago, perhaps 10 years ago, in order to really to inspire other farmers and to lobby and to do a number of things which you've done admirably. Tell us a bit about that organisation and what you have achieved and seek to achieve.
Well, our mission is to accelerate the transition towards more sustainable food and farming systems, and we're a tiny organisation. Well, not quite as tiny as when we started. We're about 10 or 12 people now, but working all over the world as a sort of catalyst to bring new ideas and new thinking into the farming and food community. We try to work as inclusively as possible and influence new ideas to find expression in farming. So obviously we work with the government, not just the UK government, but other governments, and with the USDA or in the European Commission. And we try to influence policy, because at the moment the wrong thing pays if you're a farmer and the right thing doesn't. So we need to flip that. So, we get the wind behind the sails of regenerative and sustainable farming. We need to make sure that the polluter pays, not to punish farmers who are using these things, but we need to be accountable for the impact of our farming actions on the environment and climate change. Otherwise, it won't pay to farm in a different way. And then, of course, we need to help the public better understand what the right kind of farming is. And I think that in that connection, livestock have had a terribly bad press. And of course, the unsustainable livestock production, like intensive pig and poultry production, should be eliminated. But grass-fed ruminants, I know you agree with this because of your amazing thing you did the other day, will play a central part in the future, I believe, of regenerative agriculture all over the world. And so we need to correct this misunderstanding, which is very widely across young people especially, and shared by wonderful people like David Attenborough, who thinks it's the right thing to do to eat less red meat, when in fact, that's the kind of meat you should be eating more of, and you should just give up eating chicken. But that's not widely known. So we do all that kind of stuff. And we're also working on a new way of measuring on-farm sustainability, more inclusive, not just like you are organic or you're not, nothing wrong with organic standards, but we need everybody to be in on this now, because otherwise we won't be able to change all farming in a way that can avoid irreversible climate change.
Brilliant.
There's a few of the things we do.
And do very, very well indeed. So and sustainability is, I mean, it's such a buzzword, and I think like many buzzwords, not many people really understand or have a grasp of the definition of it. When I met you 3 years ago, you were speaking at the East of England Farming Conference, and you said probably one of the most important things that we can do to push forward sustainability in the UK, it would be the reintroduction of mixed farming, notably beef and lamb, into the fens and fields of East Anglia. So tell us a bit about that. That's something which at the time I found quite shocking, and since looking into it more, I find quite normal.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are thousands of farmers all over the eastern counties on the best agricultural land in the UK who have been, really through no choice of their own, forced into arable monocultures for the last 50 years or so. And they've been mining the fertility of the soil and having to increasingly use a whole range of chemicals they probably don't like using, nitrogen fertilizer, but also pesticides. And now it's got to the state where they're not making any money, There's no life in the soil. They got rid of all the biodiversity which used to coexist with farming, and they don't like what they're doing. So in order to reverse all that, we need to go back to what used to be called mixed farming, based on a crop rotation, which had a fertility building phase, maybe of 3 or 4 years of normally clover and grass, and then an exploitative phase, or phase where you run down the fertility, growing a succession of crops, say wheat, barley, oats, vegetables, potatoes, whatever. And that system of farming doesn't need any chemicals. It's biologically based. It produces healthy food. But of course, what are you going to do with the grass and clover, which builds the soil fertility? The answer is you need ruminant animals in the main, which are alone able to convert cellulose material, which clover and grass is, into food that we can eat. So cattle and sheep, beef cattle, dairy cattle, sheep, actually need to come back to the landscape of East Anglia and the eastern counties as they used to be, and form again an integral part of mixed farming systems.
Absolutely, and beyond the fertility building of grass and clover, and I'm aware that we're about to taste a fine cheese here, there's the importance of poo. And when I speak to school children in particular, we underline, we emphasise the value of poo, of waste, of animal waste in building soil health. So
that's right. The manure of the cows too, of course, and manure has become a waste, which is a tragedy, because in the right levels with an integrated farmer system, it can be one of the drivers of soil fertility. And also, there's something about animals. I mean, Rudolf Steiner said, animals are the soul of a landscape. And I think he was right.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. If we haven't put people off too much, it's about time we tasted this cheese, I think, Patrick. Would you just introduce us to the cheese, and perhaps as I unwrap it and wave it under my nose, you could perhaps describe what I perhaps could be expecting to be smelling and then tasting.
I'll tell you what I think about this cheese. And every day it's different, but it tastes of this farm. I think that's, if you think about the microbiome of a cheese store, it's got a unique culture of bacteria and molds in it, which only live in that balance on this farm in our cheese store. And then if you think back to the milk has a unique culture of hopefully friendly bacteria in it, clean, but also with some bacterial content. And then the farm itself, it's an ecosystem of beautiful life of all descriptions, including bacterial life. And the combination of everything is of this place. And I always think when I taste this cheese, there's something, it's moving to me, as I can taste the farm, I can taste the soil of this place, the smell when I come back to the farm of the farmyard in the winter with the cows in the barn. It's terroir. And I think that all food ought to be like that. It ought to taste of the place. And if you think about provenance, we've lost that contact through our senses with the place where our food was grown. And I believe that's what we've got to get back to. So I feel very emotional that this cheese seems to be attracting more interest and people are liking it. And I think what makes me feel most happy is that it tastes of this place.
Absolutely. And it certainly does. I mean, it's that delightful tasting cheese. I guess, though, that concept of terroir it explains to some extent why I often feel that when I taste a glass of wine in the vineyard that it was produced, there's something more than when you take it away. And it's, no one's described the taste of their cheese so emotionally and beautifully as you. That's absolutely fantastic.
Well, I'll tell you another thing which really interests me, is that if you think about long ago, I was when I was in my Soil Association campaigning days, we had a show at the stand at the Royal Show in 1983, and Food from Britain, which is sort of promotional organisation of the UK government, they had a big campaign going, and they were promoting a project called Naturally British, and their flagship product was lemon curd. So we kind of mounted a big stand against it. We said, Naturally British campaign is based on products which are neither natural nor British. And if you think about it, it's really interesting now to think about provenance. which foods would you go to the other side of the world, or drinks, and think, wow, look at that. You know, you've got something there which is truly authentically British. Cheese is one of them. And that's so exciting. So I think if we made more cheeses which reflected the real authentic taste of the place, which means really they can't be easy. They can be produced with chemical fertilizer, but so much more likely to reflect the true taste of the place if they're not, then we could actually build export markets. And it's interesting that although we don't do it, Neil's Yard Dairy do it, our cheese has got a big following in Australia. And people, even in Lima and all sorts of Norway, you know, it's amazing. People are buying our cheese all over the place, and we get comments on our Instagram and stuff like that. And that's what makes me feel good. It's not, of course, it's good that our cheese is selling. Thank God it is, because otherwise we wouldn't even be here. Because really, the cheese project was a survival project, because we needed to add value to our milk as a small dairy herd farmer. We couldn't make it unless we added value, so it's partly driven by economics. But now it's found a place. It's really nice.
Well, this is an absolutely cracking cheese. And when I spoke to Tim Jones on Monday, he, as a complete cheese tasting novice, he said that the mark of a good cheese is the length of the taste, and it develops in your mouth. And this is it absolutely does that. This actually also, I think, takes the prize for me for the cheese that I've eaten most of during a tasting. I mean, I've been unable to leave it alone. So I think that's.
I do find it very Moorish. Yeah.
You know, it's been amazing during the challenges of COVID that actually we've reconnected with local food in a way that perhaps we couldn't have done without that. And that's really one of the aims of the Cheese a Day Challenge is to taste beyond not that there's anything wrong with it, but a supermarket cheddar or
well, I think, to be honest with you, it's not anyone's fault. I have a really, really good friend called Robert Craig, who's a director of First Milk, who makes cheddar up in the Lake District Creamery. And, it's a big operation, but it is a bit bland and dull, isn't it? The thing is, the whole nation's palate has been educated to believe that a cheddar should be like supermarket cheddar is. And actually, it shouldn't be like that. Because all the starters that are used are very sort of aggressive and fast and have this sweet taste, which everybody now thinks is normal cheddar, which it isn't. And I think we've got to change all that.
I couldn't agree more. With over 1,000 accredited artisan cheeses in the UK, one of the things we found on this journey is how many amazing cheeses there are. And I keep getting messages saying, Tom, the cheeses have been so good so far. I'm really worried. Can we continue to be tasting cheeses of such great caliber? And the answer is yes, we can. We could do a cheese a day for 3 years, because that's the diversity and the strength and depth of cheeses that we have in the UK. So
yeah, and I think there's room for more growth, especially if more people learn more about why authentic, local, uniquely tasting food is what will make them most healthy and restore all the biodiversity we've lost. So I think it's a cultural change that we need now, and I think it's happening.
I completely agree. Do you feel there's a place for artisan dairies within Elms, and do you think the government will continue to support that?
Well, I'd like to just be very super confident and say yes, definitely, but I don't think it's not yet a done deal. I think if you farm in Wales, it's looking very positive, because the Welsh Government Agricultural Policy Team, who are small and perfectly formed, have done a brilliant job in kind of designing a new policy framework which will incentivize regenerative farming, directly. Whereas Elms are sitting on the fence about whether they're supporting so-called land sharing or land sparing. And land sparing means kind of farming more intensively on the best land and then rewilding the rest, or some version of that. And personally, I think that's exactly the wrong direction. And land sharing means farming in harmony with nature, as we are trying to do. And I don't think DEFRA have quite decided which version of those two approaches they're going to back. And so at the moment, we're lobbying them as best we can to persuade them that actually the money that farmers are getting at the moment, which is like a social security payment, you get so much an acre just for not breaking the law, all that money needs to be redirected to support regenerative farming. So that if you move towards regenerative methods, you get the money, and if you don't, you won't. And we don't want this stewardship stuff, which everybody thinks is a good thing, especially in the environmental organizations. But actually, stewardship is sort of greening the edges of otherwise intensively farmed land. It's like a mitigation exercise. It's not what's needed now.
There does seem to be a fair bit of paralysis, and frankly, the one thing that no business wants in farming or outside is uncertainty, and unfortunately, that's what is prevailing at the moment. So
it is. All I can say is we're doing our best. Our influence is limited, but we're having a go at George Eustace and all the top civil servants in DEFRA and anybody else who listen to us to try to persuade them to change their mind. For instance, John Gummer, who I know of old. I've just had an email exchange with him in the last 24 hours, hopefully politely saying his climate change committee have got it wrong with their future agricultural strategy, which I believe they profoundly have. I mean, they don't like livestock. They don't think you can rebuild soil fertility. They like biofuel crops. They got so much wrong. And I think it's just because they don't understand agriculture.
There's so much you can gain by just having boots on the ground. In the literal sense, and you've clearly got that, Patrick. So you're a chap who comes across as being operating right in the centre of your passion. So what who inspires you?
Wow. Well, I'm going to say I have a good friend called John Elliott Gardner, who farms organically, regeneratively down in Dorset. And he's a friend of David Attenborough. And through John Elliott, I met David Attenborough, who I think is the most amazing man. So there are two people I greatly admire. I hope that David Attenborough will learn more about the benefits of regenerative and sustainable farming, because I think he's a bit confused. I think whoever advised him to say what he said at the end of that Netflix documentary called Extinction, where he said we should, he said at the end of it, he said, look, it doesn't have to be like this. I may not be around, but this is what we can do. And he goes through everything that we can do, and he's right on everything. Then he gets to food, and he said we should do what the Dutch have done and kind of intensify, and then we'll have more room to rewild what's left. I don't think that's the way ahead. So I've always been inspired by David Attenborough, and I hope to inspire him with a new way of looking at farming, because I think that's really important at the moment. I could also say Prince Charles inspires me. His book, Harmony, I think is a profoundly important book, which he wrote out of intuition. And it's all about how we need to live in harmony with nature and farm in harmony with nature if we're going to have a habitable planet.
Gosh, well, you've clearly been inspired by some greats, and thank you for the inspiration that you are, and thank you for accompanying us in this tasting today. It was an absolutely delicious cheese, and all the better for having your description of the well, I suppose of the landscape and everything that we can taste in it. So, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for all you're doing, and thank you for that, Oakley rant, whatever it was you had. It wasn't a rant, it was a beautiful piece of literature, and by the sound of it, had a fabulous influence.
Oh, thank you. Well, we're united we stand, divided we fall. I think we do need to work together as best we can.
Absolutely.
Patrick Holden, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.